This is what it looks like when the United States is divided based on wealth. Does 1% of Americans own this? 9% of Americans own this? 30% own this? 20% own this small strip of Texas? 40% own this tiny red dot in Texas? The wealth gap is one of the most concerning issues in today's modern society. Many people are unaware of how extreme the situation actually is. Seriously, it's extreme, as you see the data upcoming. So this first bar shows what Americans think the distribution is. Not a bad prediction, I'd say. However, this next bar shows that 92% of Americans find this distribution to be ideal. I personally would agree with the view of this being ideal, especially looking from a Marxist perspective, as there is less oppression from the higher class to the lower class, and overall everyone is doing well. Or, everyone is just generally doing better in this scenario. And of course, Karl Marx, he loves communism. He would want that to happen if he was still alive today. However, the actual distribution of wealth in the United States, you can barely even see the blue line here, which I thought was absolutely absurd the first time I saw this. And the red line that represents the top 20% owns about 80% of the entire nation's wealth, which is pretty insane. But anyway, here's another viewpoint. Here we go. From which this can be seen from. Again, this is what 92% of Americans find as an ideal distribution. The poverty line features fewer people, and the middle class is overall much stronger and stable in this scenario, which I wish was true. But as you're going to see upcoming, that is not the case. So I'd like to come up. Okay. However, the actual distribution looks like this. Immediately, you can notice the giant skyscraper between the 90% and 100 percentile. Even the 80th percentile is much worse off than the 90th or 100%, seriously. The middle class is almost at the same level as the lower class. They're almost, you can almost not tell them apart. But the more you look at this image, the more you realize how appalling it is. Actually, this image is really appalling as well, even more so. The top 1%, the top 1%'s wealth is so large that a larger graph was necessary in order to see the entire nation's wealth. This tower of the 1% owns about 38 to 40% of the entire U.S.'s wealth, which I'm just thinking is insane, to be honest. Well, that's crazy when I really think about it. Also, the top 1% owns about 50% of the nation's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, while the bottom 50% owns 0.5%, so less than a percent. So essentially, the bottom 50% isn't even investing. They're just trying to get by, according to this information, which is an unfortunate truth, to be honest. But anyway, through the eyes of the Marxist perspective, this is a pretty terrible. Marxists, they search for an oppression of a lower class by a higher class, which is exactly what is occurring here. It actually occurs, all the time now. This, especially, here in the United States, this makes the Marxist lens probably the best way to perceive this topic, to be honest. So here's some political cartoons I found. Here's the first one. This first one shows this huge guy, and he represents the top 10. He represents the top 10%, and he says, "Well, I left you half. What are you, greedy?" While the pie is consuming is the income, and the bottom 90%. They're just sitting there, watching as the top percent just consumes all the nation's wealth. Here's a simple one with the guy at the end of the seesaw, and he has a giant money bag just saying, "What?" While all the other people at the other end of the seesaw are looking at him very angrily. I think that this one was probably the most simplistic and stale, but I thought that overall all these political cartoons were pretty interesting. And then here is the third one right here. The third one features a guy laying on tax breaks while he's on top of a plate that says concentration of wealth, and he says, "You have nothing to complain about. Your side is growing too." While this woman, she's looking very depressed. She's holding jobless benefits, as she's standing on a plate of an increase in poverty, which just shows that divide. While many people agree that income inequality is horrible for a good reason, there are some who kind of agree with it, but at the same time it is still bad. Here's a better explanation from a YouTube channel called The Vox.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal.
Just kidding. Sorry, no. We're not all equal. Inequality, in fact, gets a ton of attention these days. President Obama called it, quote, the defining challenge of our time. But usually when people are talking about inequality, they're talking about income inequality. And income inequality is at its highest level since the Great Depression. Before taxes, the top 1% take home about 22.5% of the national income. Really think about that for a second. For every dollar paid in income in the US, almost a quarter of it goes to the top 1%. A quarter! But income inequality is actually less dangerous than its cousin, wealth inequality. The top 1% hold closer to 40% of the national wealth. So for every dollar in American assets, that's home, stock, savings, all that, 40 cents of it belongs to the top 1%. The top 1% holds more wealth in America than the bottom 90% of the country combined. And a lot of that money gets passed on to their children or their children's children. Take the heirs of Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. None of them founded Walmart. None of them were created equal either. The 6 of them have more than $140 billion in wealth. That makes those 6 people wealthier than the bottom 40% of Americans combined. Now, there's an upside to income inequality. That income is a reward for people who start great businesses and do great things. You can like income inequality, you can hate it, but at least it is money they earned in this lifetime, usually through talent or risk or hard work with a little bit of luck. But wealth inequality isn't like that. That money is often a reward for people who are just born into the right family. And it's money that keeps growing. That's a big point economist Thomas Piketty makes in his new book, Capital. The rate of the return on capital or wealth is higher than the growth rate of the overall economy. So people who have a lot of wealth, they tend to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier unless something like a war or a tax intervenes. One way they get wealthier, by the way, is politics. A lot of money can buy you a lot of political speech, particularly now that the Supreme Court is systematically dismantling the limits on buying political speech. This is a doom loop of oligarchy. Wealth buys power, power buys more wealth means more power means more wealth, and on and on and on we go until a very small fraction of the population has a whole lot of the power and a whole lot of the money. So no, all men and women aren't born equal. Some are born really, really wealthy.